So, as you may have heard, because I put out a community post about this, when we were originally recording this, right at the end of our hour long conversation, my power went out and I lost all of our conversation. So, we're here again to talk about the same exact things, and there may be a little less enthusiasm in our voices because we're literally just saying the same things over again.
Yeah, we already talked about it for well over an hour.
And we had some good conversation.
We did. And now it's just gonna be like, yeah, it was
Yeah.
good. Oh, by the way, I checked again. The actual enemy placement isn't any different in Sven. It's just that all the enemies have increased health. It's like triple health.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So we played Half-Life Sven Co-op, which is the original Half-Life with multiplayer. Up to 32 multiplayer. I think the most we played with was 8 players. So it's not exactly the original experience. The enemies are beefed up to compensate for the fact that there are more players. Temmie just said the enemy placements and stuff are still the same. The graphics are still the same. General gameplay is still the same. So we'll judge it on more of the contents of the levels and the actual level design rather than enemy difficulty, because some of the difficulty spikes were a little high in Sven co-op, and I think that was mostly just because of the enemy buffs.
Yeah, enemy buff, and then one part in particular because you cannot quick save.
God, yeah.
Why don't we just get that one out of the way, since that was
Sure.
definitely like
Yeah.
there are low points in the game, but for Sven co-op, the room where you have to go through the to anyone who's played the game before, and I mean you've probably already watched the cast at this point. The room where you go through and there's just trip mines everywhere was absolute hell on Sven because you have to get it perfect in one run. You cannot quick save in Sven. You have to do everything perfectly to the point where you pretty much can't even have multiple people doing it, defeating the purpose of the co-op. Because if multiple people are doing it, that just increases the chance that everything blows up, everyone dies. So it just has to be one person who does it. And my God, that was, for me, that was the worst part.
If you haven't played Half-Life and you want a good comparison to just that little section, it's like playing Halo 2 Legendary Co-op.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, like Halo 2's fucking checkpoint system is so fucking bad that it'll set you back like 5 or 10 minutes sometimes, and it's exactly like that because it will fuck you and just restart the whole level. It was a pain in the ass. And speaking of just the general level design in this game, it doesn't have the same polish, obviously because this was their first game. It doesn't have the same polish as Portal, which the puzzles in Portal always make you feel kind of smart for figuring it out. And it's always, I'd say 99% of the time, when you figure out a puzzle in Portal, that was the way that the developers intended it to be done, unless you're doing some kind of speed run, but that's irrelevant. The puzzles in Half-Life are kind of weird because the majority of the time I never felt like I was doing the puzzle as the developers intended. It felt more like I was failing my way through it and getting a result that let me move on to the next area. It felt very janky a lot of the time, especially because a lot of this game requires you to do a crouch jumping, and every time you press crouch in the air, it will bump your camera up instantly. There's no smooth transition. So it's kind of janky that way, and that's the way it was intended most of the time, which is especially weird.
Yeah, this is the. I mean, I haven't played every game in the world or anything, but this is the only game I can think of where you have to crouch jump just to beat the game. I know that there's crouch jumping in Halo, obviously, but that's always to get to like hidden areas or to get a skull or something like that. You know, it's never mandatory to crouch jump in any other game I've played except the original Half-Life.
Because I didn't grow up with this, I can't really appreciate it in its like full glory because by the time I got to it, this was the first time I'd ever played it. This was actually surprisingly the first Half-Life game I've ever completed. I've only ever played Alex, and that was through a friend's VR headset. I haven't actually played Half-Life 2, which I know is like sacrilege because I play on PC. But we'll get to that.
You'd be surprised how many people haven't actually played Half-Life games. It's weird because I feel like side tangent here. I feel like Half-Life is both an underrated and overrated series at the same time because like it's so highly praised by so many people, but so many of the people who praise it only praise it because they know they're supposed to praise it. They've never actually played it. Like it's the amount of people who praise these games is higher than that amount of people who've actually played them. It's very strange. But yeah, I guess I'll get into the, my whole boomer spiel since I totally forgot that was my whole angle on this. Because you mentioned that this is your first time you're playing it. Meanwhile, this is far from my first time ever touching the game. I mean, I don't have a perfect memory since this is so long ago, 1998 when it released. November something. I can't tell you for sure if I played it like exactly when it released, like that month, but I know I played it around that time, 98, 99, because I remember I was living in a specific place at the time, and I remember the opening so vividly. At the time, I had never seen anything like that. The resonance cascade is still one of my fondest early memories with gaming. To me, it's one of those things that just sticks out in my mind just as vividly as the opening for Mario 64, where you're in the courtyard and you have the freedom to move, and then you enter Peach's castle. It has that same feeling for me, that opening room in the original Doom, the opening to Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, honestly, I would say Half-Life stuck out even more because at the time, I barely even remembered what the game was called, just that I played it, and I remembered so vividly that room that you push the card into, and then the resonance cascade happening, and I was just like, man, what was that game? And then eventually I found it again, Half-Life, and I'm like, oh yeah, this game, I remember this game, and it was just, I don't know, it's for me, it's just such a vivid memory, that game.
And I can imagine, because playing back through Halo CE on PC was a big nostalgia trip for me, so I can imagine it was similar for you. Because I didn't experience this game fully, the magic is kind of lost on me. So there are things that this game did that other games didn't really do at the time, like the whole no cutscenes thing and having environmental storytelling was kind of a new concept. And I can appreciate that they did it that way. As it stands nowadays, this game is super slow paced.
Yeah, yeah, and so many games have done everything this game has done better, and it does make me sad a little bit because like this game really was revolutionary at the time, and everything this game did at the time, it was mind-blowing, and it's just like, oh my god, you can do this in a game on a PC? Like, what?
So I don't think sad is the right word for it, because if you can go back to an old game and realize that other games have taken the lessons from this game and made it better, that just shows you how influential the game was to the gaming industry.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. It's definitely an important blueprint when it comes to gaming. I guess maybe sad isn't the right word, but it's interesting how this game was so mind-blowing and revolutionary at its time, and now, if you don't go in with that mindset of like, oh yeah, this is the first time like they did most of this stuff, you go in now and it's just like, okay, it's an old game. So what? But it's to me it's really endearing and charming. It definitely has a lot of issues. Pacing for sure, puzzle design, because yeah, you just fail upwards throughout the game a lot of the time, and whenever you solve something, you never feel smart. You're just like, oh, okay, I guess I got it, which is definitely something Valve improved on. But between this and when they released Half-Life 2. They definitely improved on their puzzles.
I was surprised that Half-Life 2 came out in
Yeah,
2004 because it doesn't look like a game that came out in 2004.
not at all.
It looks like a game that came out 2 or 3 years later. Like it looks 360 PS3 era and like even good for that era. Like the character animations and stuff especially still hold up pretty well considering that was 2004 because the competition was like Halo 2, and if you look at Halo 2 nowadays, it's not exactly the greatest looking thing.
Orange Box released 2007, Halo 3 released 2007.
That's true.
You look at those games side by side. I mean, Halo 3 is aged very well, but like looking at the people in the game, it's just like,
Oh my
oof.
god. Yeah, the fact that they chose not to go with lip sync for Halo 3 cuz the technology was there. They just chose not to.
I mean, total side tangent here with going back to Half-Life 2. I guess this whole conversation is still pretty reminiscent of the first one we had.
Yeah, where we stopped talking about Half-Life and talk about its legacy.
None of that stuff is motion captured. All of it is manually animated in Half-Life 2. And that's mind-blowing because the facial animations are so good. And like, yeah, I mean some games have definitely improved on it by using like motion capture, now, but for hand animated video game in-game rendered stuff, like I can't think of anything that's really done the manually animated thing better, at least that I can think of. But yeah, I mean, Half-Life 2 blows my mind, and the fact that they go for like a realistic art style that somehow hasn't aged poorly. Like you can definitely tell that it's from an older generation of gaming hardware, but it still holds up very well. You don't look at it and you're like, "Ugh, that looks ugly. That hasn't aged well." You look at it and you're like, "Wow, that's from 2004?" Okay.
Now
Because I mean,
moving
I
back
remember
to
when Doom 3.
Half-Life.
Oh, yeah.
moving
Yeah,
moving back to Half-Life,
Half-Life.
their graphics definitely haven't aged well because Half-Life was a few years before the incorporation of there's a type of texture called bump mapping, which is essentially fake 3D. So it's a way to give like if you have a flat plane, it's a way to give it texture to make it look like it's got more three-dimensional stuff to it than actually like modeling out that, so you can use really simple shapes and give it more detail without the processing power required to have more geometry. And I believe Halo CE was the first game to do that.
Maybe on consoles. I feel like on the PC front, there were games that had done it. Maybe not before Half-Life, but not long after. I'm pretty sure the Unreal games, they might have done bump mapping. Because I remember the Unreal games being pretty revolutionary graphics wise. And by the time Half-Life came out, even then, it wasn't impressive graphically. It was more so impressive how they presented.
But anyways, the reason I went off on bump mapping is because Half-Life does not have that technology, and so a lot of textures in the game, it feels like it's one of those you really got to use your imagination to appreciate what they were going for, because wall textures are super low res.
I don't know if you have to use your imagination, but yeah, they're very low res. Part of the reason they're so low res, though, is because they use like actual like photographs for most of the textures, and I think it shows because you can probably hand draw the textures to be the same resolution but to look better. But I think because they used actual pictures, that's what makes everything look a lot fuzzier because they're taking an actual photo and then they're having to compress it instead of working, okay, here's our resolution, this is what we have to work with, like so many other games did at the time.
I also think to its strength, most of the interior scenes are fairly simple, and because it's just a research facility, it's pretty believable that most hallways are just square and maybe have a couple of little small doors and things like that. So you don't have to dress it up like a bunch of crazy stuff, but outdoor scenes look god awful.
Yeah, especially the rock geometry. I would say the outdoor sections, especially the rock geometry, is probably some of the roughest stuff graphically, not counting the scientist models. Those are pretty rough to look at. Funny, but rough.
And I feel like the original scientist models look better than the weird HD remasters they had.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, the people do not like the HD models, and for good reason. I don't know what they were thinking. Well, I mean, I feel like that's a Gearbox thing.
Wow, Gearbox messing up a port of the game? Whoa! Who would have thought?
So Gearbox made the expansions for Half-Life, Opposing Force and Blue Shift. Opposing Force at the time didn't have the HD models, quote unquote HD models. They are far from HD. But the Blue Shift expansion added them because originally Blue Shift was supposed to be a bonus campaign for the Dreamcast port that Gearbox was working on that got canned because they had to go with different models for the Dreamcast one. So then because they had to throw it on PC, they're like, well, let's just throw these models in anyway. So that's where those wonderful quote unquote HD models came from. There were different HD models for the PS2 port, which don't look so bad, but that is not the model pack we get in the HD models. But yeah, it's just kind of funny that it's we talk about Halo and how good old Randy fucked that port up. And then you have another Gearbox thing where Randy fucks something up visually too, and it's just like, God damn it.
Yeah, it's almost like the only good Gearbox game was made completely accidentally.
Yeah. Well, don't get me wrong. I mean, I know you haven't played them yet. The expansions are pretty good. Opposing Force, especially, is pretty good, and I'm sure we'll eventually get to that. Blue Shift's fine. It's not bad, but it's no Opposing Force.
The weapon sandbox is a little bit lacking, I think, because of the way that they do the weapon sandbox. Because a lot of the weapons are just guns. There's not a lot of creativity with what you can do with them. There's a couple of creative weapons over time, like being able to throw a snark and having that as like a heat-seeking grenade was neat because it's like a little alien thing and not just a grenade. And then they've got the
Infinite ammo B launcher, 5 hands.
yeah, I don't. We just call it the bee gun because it's the sound of bees when you shoot it, and that was a neat gun. And they sort of fixed this in Half-Life 2 with more variety, especially with like the gravity gun being a thing. But I wish there was more variety to the weapons because the couple of weapons that do have some variety to them are fun. None of the weapons really have any utility to them, meaning like messing with the environment at all. Pretty much every gun can just do that if it is necessary, or you just use the crowbar to like break wood. So I guess that's why the crowbar is so iconic, is because you're using it all the time to mess with the environment. And so that's like the utility weapon.
My biggest problem with the sandbox is that I feel like there's too much redundancy and replacement. Some games do it really well where you have a weapon and that weapon will still be useful later. But in this game, it's you get the crowbar, you get the pistol, and you use the pistol for like 10 minutes because then you get the shotgun. And then once you get the shotgun, you use that, and then eventually you get the SMG. And then you're basically just using the SMG and the shotgun through the whole game until you get some of the fancier weapons. I do like the crossbow a lot because I think it's a unique weapon as far as a sniper goes, because it's not really something you see, and it's kind of funny that it's just like you're in this science lab and you're fighting these big military guys, and what's the sniper rifle? It's a crossbow. You get a crossbow to fight a giant fish, which I think is kind of funny and weird because who at Valve was just like, what we need? We need a scoped crossbow. That's the precision weapon we need, because that's not what I think of at all when I think sniper rifle. And then you have the revolver, which is just another sniper rifle. Basically, you use the revolver, you use the crossbow, depending on how much ammo you have. Grenades being a separate weapon, that's weird, but that's just what we had at the time. Having a separate grenade key just wasn't a thing.
Yeah, that's another thing that like separates this from games after Halo or Halo in general. Like Halo really revolutionized what people wanted from an FPS game. So this game doesn't have dedicated melee button. This game doesn't have a dedicated grenade button, and that makes it feel really clunky.
Do you know what came out first, Halo or COD? The original COD.
Halo.
Halo came out before. Okay.
I don't believe COD came out until 2003.
God, it was that late.
Uh huh.
Okay, yeah, because I knew it was one of COD. I think is like it's the first PC shooter I can think of. The first COD where it's like, oh, you have a grenade button. So yeah, I guess Halo beat them to that for sure.
COD was meant to be the Medal of Honor killer, so they built COD with Halo mechanics in mind in order to be better than Medal of Honor. And in case you live under a rock, Medal of Honor died.
It sure did.
So they got their wish.
It did indeed become the Medal of Honor killer.
You know, they kind of owe that to Halo. I believe Medal of Honor had a limited amount of weapons that you could pick up as well, but I don't know if that was before or after Halo. And it might have been that you only had certain weapons in like certain missions. It's been a really long time since I played Medal of Honor because they're not very good.
No, they're really they're not. I don't think it's that hot of a take. I think there's a good reason Medal of Honor died out.
I recommend this game. Like, I think that this is an important piece of gaming history. Even if you haven't played it before, or even if you don't really appreciate playing through it, just going through it once, just to have the experience of seeing how far we've come, I think is an important step.
If you can, definitely play Sven.
Yeah, I would recommend playing this through on Sven if you're not really into older games, because if you have a friend who enjoys the original Half-Life, they can walk you through it and you can have some fun, but I highly recommend playing this with friends because I definitely would have been really frustrated with this game had I been playing it by myself because there's a lot of really weird level design, especially a lot of backtracking is a big part of this game. And so if you have somebody who knows where they're going, that would ease the burden a lot. And there is no quick saving in Sven like there is in the original Half-Life, but everybody's got med kits that they can use to heal each other, so that's sort of the trade-off. And then if you die, you just get reset at like a spawn point at the beginning of the level, and you don't lose your progress at all.
Except that one part.
Except the one part, yeah. So that makes it a lot less frustrating to play through. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed Sven. It gets really goofy the more people you get. Like I was trying to get like as much story as I could on my footage because we were not taking it seriously at all. But like just hearing people just like smacking the crowbar against the wall and just hear bing 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 in the background.
Over,
like, guys, please! I'm trying to record, guys. Like, I really want to play Sven again, and it makes me want to play for Half-Life 2. I know this might upset some people if they don't like the Sven cast, but I'm going to be playing Half-Life 2 with the multiplayer mod as well.
Synergy, right?
Because I think it's called Synergy. Yeah. Because it's going to be a lot more fun that way. Even if it completely breaks any semblance of the game's themes or balance. Because I want to have fun as much as I want to record these things, and I really don't think that I would have had fun with this, and I might have fun with Half-Life 2 solo because it's aged less, but it's not really my kind of game. I don't like slower paced games, which is ironic because the stuff I don't like in games is what I like in movies and TV. Like, I really like slow build up TV shows where they go into a lot of the character development and stuff like that. I would much prefer watching a show or a movie where there is no action and just a lot of character development because I like characters in movies and stuff. But in games, I want the opposite. I couldn't give less of a shit about characters or their motivations or realism in a game because I just want to have fun. And anytime that a game tries to be realistic, it brings that experience down for me because they could be doing it much better and faster paced. And so Half-Life going for that whole realism thing, especially with no cutscenes, having experienced it all as Gordon within the world and everything, is like, it's still sci-fi, so they have the sci-fi elements to it that are a lot of fun, but I much prefer something that they lean a lot more heavily into the arcadey style of gameplay.
Let's talk about the opening for the game. I mentioned it a little bit. It's one of the most vivid memories I have from like early gaming, but we definitely didn't actually talk about anything. I just wouldn't shut up about the Resonance Cascade. I mean, as far as, the opening being in the tram, I guess we can start there.
So the tram is interesting because I understand completely what they were going for, and I can appreciate what they were going for, because the whole fact that you are going through this facility and everything you see on the tram ride is stuff that you eventually see as you're going through the game is pretty cool. It especially makes it give you the feeling that this place that you're going through is a big interconnected place. But it's a 5 fucking minute tram scene where you're doing nothing.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit long. It's like watching the Pirates of the Caribbean ride on YouTube. It's one thing if you're like actually there, but you're not. At the time, it was really cool because there wasn't anything like that. Getting to see these vast, giant environments where you're seeing all these models move around, which at the time actually was very new in games. 3D games definitely weren't a new thing at this time, but every model always had like a preset of like two or three different animations. They would have a movement cycle, they'd have an attack animation, they'd have a death animation. Seeing all these things like walk around and interact with stuff, seeing the giant. I really wish there was a part in the game where you actually got to like interact with one of the loader robots that we see, reminiscent of aliens, but we never do. But it's still really cool at the time seeing like all this stuff going on, getting to see, without even knowing at the time, the fact that the game is basically showing you, hey, you're going to see all of this in the game. The fact that it gives you like a little preview, I think, is really, really smart and just really neat, because you don't really see that in games where they really show you what to expect without even knowing that that's what you're supposed to expect. But yeah, the tram ride is definitely a little too, not a little, it's very long. I think it could have definitely been condensed to 2 minutes at most, but I still appreciate it a lot. It's a good part of the game to at least have the opening credits, which is probably why it takes so long, because it has the opening credits going through the whole time. But one part I do really like about the opening is it kind of gives this little off this eerie presence where, it's just another day at work, you're going into work, but you're seeing all this stuff, and it's just like this doesn't really add up. Like, the amount of things that you see and listening to the voice. I don't even know if you were able to hear the voice over Sven Co-op, because we're just banging on shit. We're all just talking about how we can't see anything because the train's jittering for us and it's completely smooth for you. But like the voices over the speaker in the tram is saying like a lot of stuff that's kind of off-putting, like about like, injuries and being at risk for things. And it's just like, hang on, what's going on here? Without knowing anything about the game, it still kind of sets up everything like, hey, shit's gonna get crazy. It's not like the game is just gonna be you go to work simulator. It's a shooter. So I think as far as setting up a foreboding presence in the game is pretty cool.
I also think once you get off the tram, the build up to the resonance cascade is done really well. Because even before the resonance cascade happens, you can really get a sense of like, maybe we should like postpone this or like wait till these things are happening. Because it's as soon as you get off the tram and you go inside, they're having computer issues. Like they recognize you because you work there, but the computers aren't working. Then you head off to your job, and as you're going, one of the servers explodes. It's like, that should be fine. Like, it'll be fine. And then, even when you get inside into the chamber, they start muttering about things not going right on the. There's some kind of readouts that are a little weird. but they're like, it should be fine. And you're just thinking like,
And then you have the one guy who's like, Gordon doesn't need to hear all this. And it's just like, I think he does.
yeah, and so that's really that really well sets up the resonance cascade. So when it happens, it's like, you fucking idiots. We could have prevented this.
God, it's so glorious. Especially playing in Black Mesa, the remake. It's so cool because it just looks that much better.
I also think that that was kind of the peak of the storytelling of the game, because after that there's not really any great build up to the next stuff. There's the stuff about the soldiers where they mention that the military is coming and that they're going to save us. But then when the military shows up, they kill a guy before you see the military and then you see them, but like that's not a really great build up, and there's no it's just sort of like a sudden betrayal. So it didn't really work as well.
Story wise, if you can call it a story, because it's all like background stuff, really. You don't have to pay attention. There are a couple points in the beginning where they stop you, the scientist explaining everything, the train ride. You can't do anything during those parts. Everything else, though, you can just run past and not pay attention to. So, besides those parts, you don't really have to listen to anything. I would say the build up of everything up until, well, and including when you first run into the military, I would say is done extremely well, because you do hear the scientists in the background saying, "Oh, the military's coming to save us," and you're like, "Okay, sure, yeah, the military's coming to save us." And then you see the scientist run out and he's like, "Oh, it's the military. Hello." And then you watch him get fucking executed and you're like, "Whoa."
Yeah, I it may have worked a little bit better for me if the soldiers maybe had a couple of lines where they could have had something like how they do in the original Last of Us, where maybe you or a scientist gets to the soldiers and they're like, "Yes, we're saved. We're going to get out of here." And then the soldier is like talking on his radio, and then you hear him like, you can't really hear what the radio is saying, but you can hear him speaking, and then he just like agrees to something over the radio and then shoots the scientist. So you realize like, oops, they're actually not here to save us. They're here to get rid of everybody. That happens very abruptly, I think.
It does happen abruptly, but I think level design wise, I think it's done very well. What I absolutely do love about this game is that they warn you about everything that's coming up. With maybe the exception of the head crab, but even then, if you're paying attention before you even experience a head crab that can hurt you, you see the head crab that teleported into a tube and he's like trying to jump at you, but he can't because there's a tube. So I guess to an extent you can still see like, oh, these little dudes are gonna, try and attack me. But every enemy in the game, they show you ahead of time what their attacks are, what they're gonna do, and they give you plenty of time to prepare yourself for an encounter with it. You run into the head crabs, kill the head crabs. The zombies, you know that they're bad because it's the scientist bodies. They're all bloodied up. They have head crabs on them. You know that they're bad, but they're slow. So you have plenty of time to prepare and attack them. Plus, you also have a Barney there shooting at them for you as well. When you first see the bull squid, it's from a far distance. You're up on a ramp where it can't even reach you, but you see it attacking other things and spraying acid chunks at it, stuff like that. So you're like, okay, so he sprays acid. You get plenty of heads up. There's also the barnacles hanging there, and they're from such a high distance where even if you somehow manage to get caught on one, even though you're just supposed to swim in that area, it gives you plenty of time to react because it pulls you up so slowly and there's so much distance and you're looking up at it and you're like, huh, that thing has sharp teeth. It's probably going to eat me. I should shoot it. And then if you do shoot it, it drops you right back into the water where you're safe and you don't take fall damage. I absolutely love the design in the game for all the enemies, how they prepare you. The Vortigaunts, when you fight them, I guess you're not really that prepared for it, but their wind-up animation and attack animation is so slow that you see that they're charging this ball, they're going to shoot you, and when they do shoot at you, it's slow, and you're like, okay, I can just move to the side. So I'm gushing a lot, but I really do love and appreciate that they build everything up and they show you what to expect. Even when you first fight the gargantuan dude who you can't kill with regular weapons, when they introduce him to you, you see him fighting the military guys, so they already have his aggro. He's not going to attack you once you enter. I don't know. It's just I think it's really smart, and I wish more games did it. I feel like not enough games do that and have telegraphed stuff ahead of time for you to learn and know what you're gonna do.
Yeah, or if they do that in a game, they'll do it through a cutscene, which I think is a little less hands-on, and it feels less like learning and more like them telling you that you need to know this. So that is good. I also remember specifically I enjoyed the bit where they introduce portals to you, the teleporter spheres, because you find them in a controlled environment. You find them in a lab where there are two spheres in two little separate areas, and you walk into the sphere and it teleports you into the other. So you get set up, it's like, oh, okay, I know what these do now. So when you see them later in the level and they're in all of these platforming bits, you know exactly what they are going to do. So you know that you need to jump into them to go to the next area. I think the first time you actually see them in the platforming bits, they have them in like weird bits where you have to like choose one to go to the next area, or else it'll reset you to the beginning, and that's really annoying. But that goes back to my previous criticism of like a lot of the puzzle design in this game is not very good.
It's one of those things where, it's like quick saving definitely helps because it's just like, oh, okay, so don't take that portal, take that portal. So it's very trial and error, and it's very, I don't think it's the right way to do it, where you know that the player can save at any time. And so then you can make them, trial by fire their way through. Definitely not the right way to do things, but I don't know. I can't fully defend it. But for as much as the game does do right, I do really appreciate it. But yeah, there's anything involving platforming is done poorly. Even the cool little portal puzzle, because they introduce you to the portal where it's safe, but everything platforming related in this game is not done well at all.
Yeah, it's very janky, which I had touched on with like the crouch jumping stuff. I am going to say a completely original opinion that totally no one else has ever had the same sentiment. So everyone will be very surprised when I say it. Zen sucks.
Yo, dude, that's a hot take. I don't know if you can get away with saying that shit.
Yeah, no, I think everybody agrees Zen is bad.
Yeah, Zen is bad. And I looked into things even further because I always knew that like they rushed towards the end. And apparently on development of this, they were rushed and they weren't really concerned about trying to get out an A tier game. Apparently they were shooting for B tier with this game. So they were like, you know what? If we strive for perfection, we're never going to get the game out. Let's just put it out now. And so they did. And so the fact that they were shooting for B tier and this game ended up being as influential as it is very impressive. The fact that this was them half-assing their way and that this is what we got says a lot.
And that almost feels reminiscent of Halo too, right? Like Halo's campaign was made in 6 weeks, and they only made the campaign because they felt like they needed to make it to go with the multiplayer, but they knew they had a really fun multiplayer, but like I don't think they knew just how much it would affect the industry from the little bit that they had created. Like they just played it and they were a little obsessed with it, and then like everybody was obsessed with it.
It explains a lot how, that this game feels a little sloppy at times. And it makes a lot of sense in the fact that later they did bring us their A game material. Half-Life 2 and its episodes. Well, we'll get there when we get there. Half-Life 2 though, and parts of the episodes. Portal 2, they really brought their A game, level design wise and everything.
Yeah, and obviously Half-Life has had a lasting effect on the industry, because if you play games of any kind and you don't know what Half-Life is, you are clearly not paying attention. Like, you are actively ignoring it, because everybody knows what Half-Life is. Even if you haven't played it, you know what Half-Life is. There's no way you don't.
with all the memes and everything and the jokes about, like Valve can't count to 3, Half-Life 3 confirmed, all that stuff. Like, yeah, Half-Life is so influential, even though they haven't released a game in, well, I guess now they have Half-Life Alyx, but before Half-Life Alyx, the fact that they hadn't released a game in 13 years in the series, but everyone was still talking about it, I think it says so much.
I got a little off topic in the original conversation about Alyx because I wanted to gush about it. So I'm going to do that again because I want to gush about it. Alyx is a terrifying game. It really brings out the horror elements of Half-Life, where they never really were that scary in the originals. So things like head crabs, they're just little tiny things, they jump at you, whatever. Or barnacles, they're not that scary. Or the zombies, like they could be a little scary, but they're just like things on a screen.
You haven't played through Ravenholm yet in Half-Life 2. We'll get there when we get... honestly, I know you're planning on doing co-op for Half-Life 2, but I think at the very least, for the Ravenholm section, you should play that part on your own, for sure, because it's... God, it's so good.
Head crabs are just little things, they jump at you, whatever. They're kind of annoying in the original and Half-Life 2. But in Alyx, because you're in VR, these things are life-size, and you never realize how gigantic a head crab is until it's jumping at you in first person, because they're big enough to eat your head. Like, they're big, they're terrifying, and that works perfectly for like being scary. And barnacles, they're like 3 or 4 feet long, and they've got the tentacle tongue things. They're really scary, and when you shoot them in Alyx, they like barf up a bunch of blood and bones and stuff, and it's like, these are actually terrifying, and like I am genuinely scared. Or like, because you are only as fast as yourself in the game, zombies are actually a mess, because you have to aim and fire at them while they're shambling towards you, where normally in other games it's like, oh, okay, slow shambling zombie, but it's like, oh shit, I gotta like, I'm running out of ammo, I gotta deal with this. Like, and it also makes the Combine like actually intimidating, because I don't remember, I've never played a Half-Life 2, but from what I've seen of people playing, the Combine are just kind of generic enemy type that look a little bit cool, but they're not really that intimidating in terms of a presence.
Lore-wise, the Combine are cool and really creepy and really fucked up, but in-game in Half-Life 2, they're not that great, because these guys who are elite trained, military professionals who are making sure that they survive so that way they can get all these wonderful things that they're promised for being Combine police. They just charge at you blindly, and they're just like, oh, he's over there, and they just will run at you in a straight line. You can be behind cover. They'll run at you in a straight line. You just have your shotgun out, and they're like, oh, there he is, pop. Here's another one, pop.
In Alyx, they're a lot more terrifying, because you don't get an automatic weapon in Alyx, I believe. But when I was playing, it was like a pistol, I think a shotgun, and like a grenade launcher. So with the fact that the Combine have an automatic weapon makes them scary. There was a moment where I was playing that made me go, fuck you, game, in a good way, because it actually fooled me. The Combine will call out to you by name. They'll call out to you as Alyx and say that they're on your team and that they're here to save you. So you'll pop out of cover and they'll shoot you like, fuckers. Like,
Holy
I can't
shit.
believe I fucking fell for that. It was
That's
such
awesome.
a good thing, because it works so well in VR. And like, that genuinely scared me, and I was so mad for falling for that. And that was like, that was awesome.
God, I can't wait till I can play Alyx finally.
Oh yeah, I really want to play it again. I really want to get a VR headset to play it, but I don't have one. Also, to bring this conversation back to Half-Life, playing through Half-Life has actually made me want to try Black Mesa again. I had tried Black Mesa, borrowing it from a friend at one point, but I couldn't really get into it, and I think it was because I didn't have the original context for Half-Life, because a lot of it was kind of slow and a little bit plain, but now seeing it, I can go to Black Mesa and sort of appreciate what they've changed, and I really want to see how they've changed the level design, because when we were talking last, you said they had changed the level design to improve a lot of things.
Yeah, they changed a lot. They kept a lot the same in very specific instances, so that way it can be like, yeah, I remember this part. But they changed so much of it too to where it does feel like a new game, but it has enough of that familiarity where you'll come back to certain set pieces or very specific moments and you're like, I remember this exactly. One of the moments that really sticks out to me, and it's funny because it's such a mundane moment, but in the original Half-Life, when you're like going through the like that freezer section, and then there's the one part where you have to like crawl through the vent, you have to get the conveyor belt moving again, and then it goes back and forth, and you have to go through the vent and then get onto the conveyor, the little shelf thing that moves side to side across the ceiling. You get onto that, and then you crawl into the other vent. It's such a small moment, but it's one of those things where it's just like it's so oddly specific that you're like, yeah, I remember that. And then you get to it in Black Mesa and you're like, yeah, I remember this. And it's weird because there so many of the times it's not these like amazing moments, but there's so much of these oddly specific moments where it's just like, yes, I remember this exactly. So to where it feels like you're still playing Half-Life, but yeah, they changed so much of it too, where it feels like a new game. Mostly for better, sometimes for worse, but definitely worth a playthrough.
It also seemed, well, I have seen a lot of the work they put into Zen to make it like a legitimate level. It looks like they've definitely put in some like real environmental storytelling to tell, like, you can, I think in the original you could see like there was an HEV suit lying around at one point.
Yeah, there's a couple, so you can see that, they've been sending people totally, well, not off topic because it's still about the game, but going back to the whole environmental storytelling. I love the chapter Questionable Ethics, where you go through and you see that, wait a second, Black Mesa's the bad guys. They've been capturing these creatures and they've been experimenting on them this whole time. And you're going through all these different rooms where they've been experimenting on shit. And I love that part of the game because it's just like, oh shit, and it's no one's telling you that Black Mesa's been doing this, but you can see that Black Mesa has been doing shit. This resonance cascade is not a freak accident. They knew they knew that something was going to happen from this, and that this was, it was planned out. Maybe not to be this destructive, but they planned to bring all this shit over. And I think it's kind of cool to, you go through the level and you discover that on your own without anyone having to tell you and bash you over the head with, oh, science bad.
It reminds me a lot of the UAC in Doom, where Doom's a little more on the nose about it, like really on the nose about it. But like it's that whole thing, and it's a pretty big cliche at this point of like, ooh, science facility is actually evil science facility. Who would have guessed? Like they do that in every game. They do that with the UNSC and Oni in Halo. They do that with the COG in Gears of War. They do it with Black Mesa. They do it with Aperture Science. Like it's a big cliche at this point. But like,
I think it's done really well though in Half-Life. I mean, as much of a cliche as it is now, I think it's done really well in Half-Life because, they show the whole opening, besides looking outside the train and seeing like, okay, hang on, there's some weird shit going on. I mean, to the point where you even see like a military helicopter dropping people off that aren't the military. So like you already know that there's some kind of like connection with the military. But for the most part, everything is just so mundane and everyone just seems like a normal average cubicle worker, even though you don't see that many cubicles, but everyone just seems like a normal person going to work and everything seems so mundane. And I think that it does play really well when you do see that, like, oh no, they've actually been doing awful shit. And I forget exactly when in the game, but I remember one of the scientists in the background says, I don't know if I want to go to the surface. What'll they do when they find out what we've been doing here? And I don't know, I appreciate stuff like that, that it's in the background and it's not bashed over your head. Like you can just run past it, but if you want to pay attention, it's there.
I think I prefer the way they do it in Portal and Portal 2 because it's pretty much a parody, but also like way more absurd about what's going on, especially when you get to the Cave Johnson sections of Portal 2 and just seeing like the devolution of Cave Johnson from like a respectable businessman into like a fucking monster, like, and he's just insane.
Kidnapping homeless people on the streets, replacing their blood with peanut water.
Fighting an army of mantis men, and then of course the lemon rant when he's like full
Yeah.
crazy. Like, I really enjoyed that a lot more because that's a lot more memorable to me, of like a moment that sticks with me, of like those times going down in the caves of Aperture Science and seeing just things going crazy.
As much as I love Half-Life, and I know I've been gushing about it, it probably sounds like it's my favorite Valve thing ever. It's not. Like, I love Portal so much more than I love Half-Life. But the thing with Portal is it's finished. It's like it's properly finished, 1 and 2.
It's also a nice short experience. Like the first Portal you can beat in like 4 hours, and the second one is not much longer.
4 hours is a bit generous. I would say
is it?
it's more like an hour. It's more like an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on how quick you are with the puzzles. Yeah, Portal 1. I mean, I've even gone through it in like 40 minutes, which is by no means a speed run. So the first Portal is definitely just a cute little experiment. You know, Valve just trying to do other shit. But Portal 2 is definitely a full game. That one is, it's like a solid 6 hours through a casual playthrough without trying to rush through it.
Or also some sacrilege is that I played through Portal 2 on PS3 the first time. I don't even think I own it on PC.
That's hardly sacrilege. I mean, Portal came out at the right time where console gaming was so mainstream and PC gaming was so niche at the time, where I think most people who played Portal probably did play it on their PS3 or their Xbox 360, you know, through whether that be, you know, through the Orange Box, downloading Portal as an Xbox Live Arcade title, or even just only picking up Portal 2, which I remember a lot of people did because people knew enough about the first Portal. The plot's relatively simple. You go through, Cake's a lie, GLaDOS is bad, you beat her, you get the song, Still Alive. Like, everyone knew that song, even if they hadn't beat the game.
Yeah, Jonathan Colton's music is hilarious.
Everyone was able to pretty much go into Portal 2 and know what to expect. But yeah, I mean, it came out at just the right time. Honestly, I feel like there were, side tangent here on top of a side tangent. I could be wrong. I don't have the figures, of course. But at the time, I can probably safely say there were more console players for the Left 4 Dead games than there were PC players at the time. I mean, now that's different because, Valve will cough out the game at, $2 on sale like every other day. So I feel like now there's probably more PC players than there are console players, obviously, especially for how old the game is and you get mods on PC. But yeah, I mean, at the time, console gaming was so mainstream to where.
Yeah, Valve games definitely found their staying power on PC, especially because, people still play CSGO, and a lot of people still play Left 4 Dead 2 and stuff like that.
They made an Xbox 360 port of CSGO.
Yeah, I remember.
It's awful.
If we want to bring this back to Half-Life, we haven't talked about the music again.
Oh my god.
The music's actually so really good. It's got a lot of good music. And I had said this the first time. I didn't realize that the Valve intro little jingle music, the Valve intro stinger, was from Half-Life. That little stinger that plays every time you see a guy with a valve in his head in subsequent Valve games, that's from Half-Life. Like, that is the Valve music, and it plays when you're going outside for the first time, I think.
I don't think it's the first time. I could be wrong. I feel like you went outside before it plays, but it does happen at one point where you're inside, you're in a sewer, and then you hop out onto the cliffs, and then as soon as you get out, you hear that bow.
Yeah, but it's crazy to think that that came from Half-Life, and that's a sound that everyone will immediately associate with Valve.
Yeah, and I think at the time all of us were like, Valve sound, you know. And the crazy thing is, it's a full song.
I think the song is actually called the Valve
Let
song.
me check. I actually have the soundtracks.
It is called Valve Theme Extended in the Half-Life soundtrack.
It's called Hazardous Environments in Half-Life 2, so that might be like the official name of the song, but yeah, everyone now just knows it as it's the Valve theme.
Yep, and the couple of Valve games like Half-Life and Portal both have very memorable music, especially Portal's like regular soundtrack is also very memorable.
Especially Portal 2. I love how dynamic it is.
It's especially how the music the soundtrack changes as you're like flying through puzzles. That's super satisfying.
It is. Yeah, when it gets like a little distorted and scratchy and like speeds up a little bit. Yeah, good shit. But yeah, no, yeah, the music for Half-Life really good. The credits song, such a bop. Does not feel like it belongs in the game, but it's a bop, all right. If it wasn't for Half-Life, we would not have so many of the things we have now. If it wasn't for Half-Life, we wouldn't have had Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike started out as a mod and then became a full product through Half-Life.
We probably just wouldn't have had Valve, right? Like if Half-Life was a flop, this was their proving game, so we wouldn't have had Valve or Steam, and the world would be dominated by the Sega Dreamcast.
Well, but part of the reason why I brought up Counter-Strike, it's not that I'm like the biggest fan of Counter-Strike or anything, but if we never had a Counter-Strike, we wouldn't have like I mean, I know so many people don't care about esports, but like Counter-Strike was like the first real esport game outside of StarCraft. So, I mean, there's this whole scene of online gaming that we never would have had if it wasn't for Counter-Strike, which we never would have gotten without Half-Life.
There were cutscenes in games before Half-Life, but like when you would get into a level, there was never much of like AI scripted to do certain things and walk around and interact with the environment. It was mostly just enemies were placed in the environment, go kill them, like that kind of thing.
And they were called cutscenes for a reason because they always cut away from the game. You never had this seamless transition. I love how the levels in this game aren't presented as levels. All of Black Mesa is presented as this seamless experience. And yeah, you have like a little loading screen between chunks because it has to load the next chunk of the game. But I love that it never, apart from when you go into the black room and you get kidnapped and thrown into the garbage chute, besides that one specific part, the game never transports you. Well, I mean, I guess there's teleporting in the beginning and then the part with the teleporters, but it never takes you out of the game. You always have full control. Even during the parts where they talk to you, you can still move around. It doesn't ever once say, no, you don't get to do anything. And I think that's really cool. And it's honestly the first time I can ever think of a game doing that, not just a shooter, but just a game in general doing that, where there's not a text box popping up that you have to mash buttons through or anything like that. It's just seamless all the way through. I just wonder how long it would have been till we had that if it wasn't for Half-Life.
It is also a bit of a shame that the source engine still hasn't gotten to that point where it's can do seamless levels yet. So
Does Alex still have the loading?
Alex still has the loading, yeah, and it's a little weird when it happens because it's in a bit random spots, and it was in a bit of random spots in this original as well, and I know it's in random spots in two and Portal and stuff like that, and so even Black Mesa, which was the remake, having level transitions and not just having it as a big seamless thing when we've been having seamless games for 15 years up to that point. Not quite 15 years, but you know what I mean. If we count like 2010 as the point, it would have been about 5 years. And I guess it's an indie game that was like given its grace by Valve, but like the fact that in 2015, and it released fully 2015, right?
Black Mesa? No, I think Black Mesa was more recent.
It might have been. But in any case, like the fact that we still can't do seamless level stuff on the Source engine kind of dates it as an engine.
Yeah, I do wish that we didn't have to get the loading screen. I don't mind the way the Half-Life games do it because instead of cutting away to a screen where it shows the loading progress, and Half-Life, I mean, like I said, it's literally just in the middle of the screen in orange text, it'll say loading, but it doesn't change what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's
It's
still jarring.
yeah, it's still jarring, but for a 1998 game, I think it's very impressive.
Oh, sure, no. In 1998 it was fine. I'm just talking about the fact that we still can't do it.
Yeah, it's like, hey, how come I mean, watching you play Titanfall 2 and then seeing that loading, and I'm like, what is this, a Source game? And you're like, yes. And I'm like, what the fuck? Because it's like, it's weird because the Source engine can do so much, and it is a very impressive engine, especially since it's the same engine since 2004. But yeah, it's when it comes to the loading transitions, it's definitely showing its age. It happens way more frequently than I would like to see. And as far as Black Mesa's full release as a finalized product, it wasn't until March 2020.
Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, it was still in early access for the longest time. Yeah, it finally released 2020. I remember it being semi-playable all the way back in 2012, though, because I remember when they first announced it, and I saw it, and I'm like, "Whoa, this looks cool!" And yeah, that was all the way back in 2012. So it took them 8 years to make this game. Goddamn.
Yeah, well, it's an indie team, and you know,
Yeah.
like Valve gave them the go ahead, but I'm pretty sure they didn't like pay them to do it. So
No, they didn't, but they gave them the full go ahead to make the game because I mean they were using Valve's property and everything. So it's pretty awesome that Valve let them make it, not to stroke them off more than people already do. I'm definitely not the kind of person who believes that companies are our friends or anything like that, but it's still really nice to see that they let people use their properties and make games still.
because we've had, Black Mesa was a really good fan remaster.
Unfortunately, though, it also meant we got to hunt down the Freeman.
Sonic Mania was a good fan made thing endorsed by Sega, and that was paid for by Sega, but like it was from people who had done other Sonic related things on the like outside of Sega's thing. I hope that the next Valve game has a weapon wheel and not the weird swap UI that they have. Because I get what they were going for, and I get that it was good at the time, but it's a pretty dated UI, and weapon wheels are a lot more intuitive, especially because you can have weapon wheels and have multiple weapons per wheel. So like GTA, where you can have like the pistol slot and you can scroll to the pistols, or the assault rifle slot and you can scroll to the assault rifles, and like Doom has it, and it's really nice in Doom because Doom's got a big suite of weapons, and I think Half-Life would absolutely benefit for it.
Kind of off topic because I know you've actually played it. Obviously, I've seen a little gameplay of Alex. I know I'm avoiding as much as I can, but obviously, I've seen gameplay.
Oh, Alex does have a weapon wheel. Yeah, you're right.
How does that feel? How does it feel in game, though?
It feels intuitive. Yeah. So the Quest, I believe, had a touchpad thumbstick thing. I think that was how I did it. It might have been a trigger, but then you just like kind of thumb to what weapon you want, and because there's only three, it's super easy to thumb to whichever one you want, and it brings up a weapon wheel, and that felt very good. And it was nice and easy because it's big fat buttons.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'll do that on their next game, which I'm pretty sure at this point their next game will be whatever the next Half-Life is. It looks like that is indeed what they're working on.
Yeah, we talked about this last time as well because I didn't want to spoil it for you, so I didn't say anything specific. But the end of Half-Life Alyx is a lead-in to the next bit of Half-Life because they fix up a not a plot hole from the end of 2, but more like a where they had tried to tie up a plot point, they untie it.
I don't know anything plot related about Alex, but from what I understand, just from little bits that people have said without trying to spoil it, they said that it changes the ending from Half-Life 2 Episode 2. And the way that game ends is the advisors come in, they grab Eli, they kill him. Alex is crying over Eli's body. The plan going forward is that they're going to go to the Borealis. That's how Half-Life 2 Episode 2 ends. And the fact that people are saying that it changes the ending, I don't know how it changes the ending.
Yeah, it changes it in a pretty major way.
Yeah, and so I'm very curious, but from what I understand, they wouldn't change the ending for the game if they weren't planning on doing something with the series, of course. I mean, who knows? Maybe they're just being assholes, but they're definitely planning on doing something.
The important thing will be because they've changed the ending in this game that is a VR game that not a lot of people have the availability to play. When they make the next game, they've got to make it clear that that happened because we don't want a Halo 4 situation.
I think that they can pull that off really well. Right. So I don't think that they're gonna fuck that up because Half-Life has actually been really good about starting you off. Even the episodes, which are expansion packs to Half-Life 2, they still start off in such a brilliant way to where it's either a really great refresher for what just happened, or if for whatever reason that's someone's first experience in Half-Life, it catches them up to speed pretty well and gives them just enough details to know what's going on without it being annoying for people who've already played Half-Life. So Valve is really good about doing that. I mean, Half-Life 2, the amount of people who played Half-Life 2 and never played Half-Life 1, I imagine is pretty high. And Half-Life 2 does such a good job of explaining what happened in Half-Life 1 without it being annoying. And it's kind of funny too because there's a lot of things when we get to Half-Life 2, and I think it'll be interesting when you're doing the cast for it, going over the plot. There's a lot of things in Half-Life 2 that are kind of, hang on, that doesn't really make sense. Like, yeah, I mean, the fact that, you're able to obliterate every scientist you run into in the game in Half-Life 1, and of course it's like that never happened.
Well, there's a certain amount of and when you have games like that, and we can also attribute this to games that have like morality choices but then have a sequel. There's a certain amount of like artistic in the stuff you have to take. So
Right, but even beyond that, when you run into Barney for the first time in Half-Life 2, he's like, "About that beer I owed you," as if like he was already friends with you. But in the actual game, Gordon, I mean, we call every cop Barney because they're all the same model and all have the same voice. But in the actual game story, Gordon never interacts with Barney once.
yeah, he
The only
does.
time you
Yeah,
ever see Barney, no, no,
you
no.
interact
The
with him
only
in the
time you ever
front.
see Barney,
You
no,
interact.
that's not Barney.
That is a
That's
Barney.
not Barney. No, it's a Barney, but it's not the Barney.
Well,
The
okay.
only actual Barney. Okay, so the actual Barney in the game is the one who's banging on the door to be let in. And in fact, in the first game, he never has the name Barney. He didn't get the name Barney until we got the expansion Blue Shift. And you find out that the Barney who's banging on the door, like, "Hey, let me in, I'm late," that's Barney. And
Okay.
he never interacts with Gordon once. Whenever you see Kleiner in Half-Life 2, he acts so nice to you. Like, everyone acts like your friend in Half-Life 2, but in Half-Life 1, everyone's a fucking asshole to you.
Well, so the events of Half-Life, like the Black Mesa incident, happen over like a day or two. And so they could have been our friend from previous work weeks. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that we've never interacted with them.
It's possible, but it's still very unlikely.
Like there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief you have to have.
Gordon's a new hire though. Like that's the other thing though. Gordon's like a new hire to
No,
Black Mesa. He
no.
hasn't yeah, no, he hasn't been there that long. Like they know him, but he hasn't actually been
Okay,
working at Black
so
Mesa that long.
well, right, but he's been there for like a week or so. It's not our first day on the job or anything.
Yeah, but I just think it's funny how everyone's so familiar with him and how he's like, like worshipped in Half-Life 2. I think it's really funny because like he is kind of like this no-name guy.
He was a pretty important character.
No, no, no. Don't get me wrong. He is. I just think it's kind of funny how like how coincidental everything is in Half-Life 2. Not to mention the fact that like you're not even in New Mexico. You're in a completely different part
Yeah, it's like
of the
Europe.
US.
No, it's Europe, isn't
Yeah,
it?
is it Europe?
I'm
I
pretty
don't
sure it's
know.
Europe.
Like that's the thing. They never actually say where you are, but you're somewhere. But it's just funny how like literally everyone from the Black Mesa incident is all specifically in this one sector of City 17, and I just find that so weird.
Yeah, so I think there's like an extended lore reason for that. I don't know if this is spoilers or not for Alex, or if it's part of lore that people know, but there's a bit in Half-Life Alex where you find a globe and it's just the US is like X'd out on the globe. So like something happened in the US and I guess everybody moved to Europe.
Oh, okay.
So it just happened between the events of 1 and 2.
Yes, if that is part of the Half-Life lore, I wasn't aware of it, but I mean that would make more sense if, everything was like condensed. I mean, I guess it would make sense because of the 7-hour war, unless that was fought in Europe for some reason, but I don't think it would be considering the Resonance Cascade and the portal where they entered was through Black Mesa, so I imagine that would have had to have been in the US. But then I also find it kind of weird that like Dr. Breen is the one who's in charge, who was the guy in charge of Black Mesa. And so it's just like why is Dr. Breen the one who's in charge of humanity? That's what I mean where it's like it's kind of weird that like everyone specifically from Black Mesa incident are the ones who are important to the story. Like following the story, it makes sense, but when you actually like think about it in a realistic standard, it's like why though? It's one of those things where it's just like you just accept it, but it's just kind of funny when you actually think about it. It's just like this is not very likely. That's kind of what I meant where like going from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2.
There could also be and this is I'm going to try not to say too much, but it could be the G-Man fucking with things.
Yeah, that's very possible.
Because the G-Man is shown to have powers that can fuck with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's not a spoiler for me. Even in Half-Life 2 and its episodes, mainly its episodes, G-Man reveals more about himself that he is a big player. Like in Half-Life 1, all you know is that he has employers who tell him to look at shit. That's all you know. And then he's like, "Oh, my employers want you to work for me, Gordon." And that's all you know. And then Half-Life 2, it opens with, "Hey, wake up, Gordon. It's been 20 years. Go do something." He doesn't even tell you what to do.
Was it 20? I thought it was 6.
No, yeah, it's like 20 cuz
What? No, hang on. 1 and 2. I think it was like 6 years. 20 years. What the
yeah,
fuck?
20.
I thought it was like
Yeah.
6 years.
No, it's like 20.
Why does Barney look like he's 20?
I know, it's so weird. That's another thing where it's just like that doesn't make sense. Yeah, Eli makes sense because he looks like an old dude now. But yeah, Barney looks like he's 20, maybe 30.
How fucking old is Barney in Half-Life 2?
He's got to at least be in his 40s.
He does not look 40.
Maybe 38. But no, he does not look 30. He doesn't yeah, he looks pretty young.
He was born in the 80s, so he is like 40.
I'm trying to remember if G-Man intervenes in Blue Shift cuz for some reason I'm forgetting.
Well, okay, so it says he's born in the 80s, so if he was born in the 80s, he's 18-ish in Half-Life 1.
Yeah, because Half-Life
So
1 basically
he's-
takes place when it came out in 1998.
Well, that still makes him 38, right?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
I'm going to have to replay Blue Shift because I don't even remember now if G-Man shows up at the end to intervene. Because I remember the ending for Opposing Force. No! G-Man doesn't show up at the ending at all. So no, Barney wasn't like put in stasis or anything like that.
Yeah, not like the soldier in the other
In
one.
Opposing Force, yeah, he Adrian Shepard, G-Man puts him in stasis. He's never pulled him out, but he put him in stasis.
So I guess Barney just ages like a Hollywood actor.
Paul Rudd.
Yeah.
Barney is Paul Rudd. Yeah, I can't believe Paul Rudd is 50.
Jesus Christ, Paul Rudd is 50? Special thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel as well, you'll get your own custom avatar that'll go at the end of the videos you helped support that month.